History isn't just kings and castles. It's a time when putting a pig on trial was a serious legal procedure, and the best cure for a toothache was a tooth pulled from a corpse. Today, we're exposing 32 pieces of evidence that prove the medieval mindset was one of the most paranoid, medically insane, and utterly bizarre in human history. Your ancestors were weirder than you can possibly imagine. 1. That throbbing headache that feels like a tiny, infernal blacksmith is hammering away behind your eyeballs? Definitely a demon. Waking up in a cold sweat with a raging fever? Clearly, you've been infested by a whole legion of hellish imps having a rave in your bloodstream. If you were experiencing hallucinations or severe depression, that wasn't a chemical imbalance. It was a high-ranking demon from the Ars Goetia, trying to redecorate your psyche with brimstone and despair. Long before humanity understood germ theory or complex microbiology, the default explanation for any internal ailment was supernatural malevolence. Demons were the universal scapegoat for everything from a stomach bug to schizophrenia. Consequently, the most trusted treatment wasn't medicine, but a full-blown exorcism, which was essentially less of a clinical procedure and more of a very loud, very angry eviction notice for a paranormal squatter. 2. Found yourself casting a slightly too envious eye on your neighbor's exceptionally plump pig? Don't be surprised when you're suddenly afflicted with a painful outbreak of boils. Spend a bit too long daydreaming about the tavern barmaid? Enjoy your new, inexplicable ache that makes your teeth chatter uncontrollably. The church relentlessly preached that your mind was under constant, divine surveillance. A cosmic thought police force was monitoring your internal monologue and harboring sins, even if you never acted on them, could trigger direct physical punishment from a deeply judgmental heaven. Pride, greed, lust, and envy weren't just spiritual failings. They were invitations for divine retribution in the form of illness, accidents, or financial ruin. Your own body could become a billboard advertising your secret sins for the whole village to see. 3. Where do mice come from? The medieval recipe was shockingly simple. Find a dark, dusty corner, pile up some sweaty, dirty rags, add a handful of wheat and perhaps a cheese rind for garnish, and wait. Before long, a litter of mice would simply assemble themselves from the gunk. This wasn't a fringe theory. It was the accepted science of spontaneous generation. The same logic applied elsewhere. Maggots were just the physical manifestation of decay in meat, flies were born from the morning dew, and frogs were generated from river mud after a good rain. It was a world where life didn't require parents, just the right combination of filth and neglect. This belief, which dates back to Aristotle, made perfect sense to them and turned pest control into a simple matter of better housekeeping. 4. Imagine a toothache so exquisitely painful that it makes you contemplate bashing your own head against a stone wall for relief. In the Middle Ages, there was a popular remedy, though it required a strong stomach and questionable morals. The solution was to get your hands on a tooth pulled directly from a human corpse. The ghoulish logic was that the lingering ghost or spiritual essence attached to the dead tooth would act as a supernatural bouncer, intimidating the evil toothworm they believed was drilling into your enamel and causing the agony. This fueled a grim black market for human remains, where desperate sufferers might buy a molar from a grave robber. It was a dental plan that involved a clandestine trip to the cemetery and a complete disregard for the concept of rest in peace. 5. For any medieval king or noble, the fear of assassination by poison was constant. Every feast could be your last. The ultimate home security system wasn't a food taster, but a spiraled, magical unicorn's horn known as an alicorn. This legendary artifact was believed to instantly detect and neutralize any poison the moment it touched it. A quick swirl in your wine goblet could save your life. It was also said to purify the foulest water, making it crystal clear. Of course, the entire industry was one of history's most brilliant scams. Cunning Norse merchants would sail down from the Arctic with narwhal tusks, market them as genuine unicorn horns, and sell them to paranoid aristocrats for more than their weight in gold, becoming fabulously wealthy off the gullibility of the elite. 6. How do you prove guilt in an era before forensic science? You don't. You outsource the job to God by subjecting the accused to a brutal, often lethal, test known as the trial by ordeal. For example, a suspected thief would be forced to carry a bar of red-hot iron. If, after 3 days, their hand was healing cleanly, it was a divine sign of their innocence. If it was a festering, infected mess, they were guilty. Trial by water for accused witches was a particularly grim, no-win scenario. If you were thrown into a river and sank, you were deemed innocent, but you also drowned. If you floated, the pure water was rejecting your evil, proving your guilt, so you'd be dragged out and executed. It was a judicial system with all the fairness of a coin flip, where the process itself was the punishment. 7. Today, a sneeze is a minor biological event. In the Middle Ages, it was a moment of profound spiritual vulnerability. It was commonly believed that a powerful sneeze could literally expel your soul from your body through your nose, launching it into the open air. In that brief, terrifying instant, your body was an empty vessel, a vacant property wide open for any opportunistic demon to move in and take possession. The phrase, "God bless you," was therefore not mere politeness. It was an urgent verbal emergency rescue. It acted as a spiritual lasso, meant to grab your fleeing soul and yank it back into your body before it could float away or be hijacked. Having a common cold must have been a source of constant existential dread for everyone around you. 8. If your cherubic, healthy baby suddenly became sickly, cried nonstop, or failed to grow, medieval parents had a horrifying explanation that went far beyond colic. They believed that malevolent fairies had snuck into the nursery, stolen their perfect human child to use as a servant or to strengthen their own bloodline, and left a changeling in its place. This creature, a withered, ill-tempered, and eternally screaming fairy, would then torment its new family. This belief was a tragic way to explain birth defects, disabilities, or illnesses they couldn't understand. To expose the fraud and get their real child back, parents would resort to cruel rituals, like holding the suspected changeling over a fire, believing the creature's terror would force the fairies to make the switch back. 9. Let's talk about beavers, which according to medieval lore, were not only skilled engineers but also masters of desperate, theatrical self-preservation. If you were a hunter tracking a beaver for castoreum, a glandular secretion highly valued for medicine and perfume, which people mistakenly believed came from its testicles, the beaver had an unbelievable escape plan. Legend claimed that a cornered beaver, knowing exactly what the hunter was after, would literally bite off its own genitals and hurl them at its pursuer. It's a strategy that basically translates to, "Here, take them. Is this what you wanted, you freak? Now leave me alone." Imagine the hunter's sheer bewilderment, standing there with a pair of bloody beaver bits at his feet. It's a truly mind-boggling tale of animal sacrifice, born from a complete misunderstanding of beaver anatomy. 10. Fancy a nice, relaxing hot bath to soak away the grime of a hard day's work? In the Middle Ages, that simple pleasure was seen as a reckless gamble with death itself. Public bathhouses were often seen as dens of sin and debauchery. But the real fear was medical. The prevailing wisdom was that submerging your body in hot water opened up your pores, essentially creating thousands of tiny little doorways for disease to enter. They believed pestilence, carried on bad air, or miasmas, would seep right into your softened skin and infect you from the inside out. As a result, many people avoided bathing for weeks, months, or even longer. Being caked in a protective layer of your own filth and sweat wasn't just common. It was considered a sensible health precaution. A strong body odor was practically a sign of piety and good judgment. 11. For us, the Garden of Eden is a metaphorical tale from the Bible. For medieval scholars and map makers, it was a very real, physical place that you could theoretically point to on a map. They believed it was a tangible location on Earth, usually situated somewhere in the distant, mysterious Far East. Elaborate medieval world maps, known as mappamundi, often included a detailed depiction of Eden, typically enclosed by an impassable wall of fire or a ring of unclimbable mountains. You can just picture a group of ambitious explorers planning their route. All right, lads, If we can just get past the land of the dog-headed men and avoid the gold-digging griffins, paradise should be just on the other side. It was the ultimate destination for adventure travel, with biblical stakes and a very real chance of being eaten by a monster along the way. 12. That deep, satisfying yawn you can't hold back? To the medieval mind, that was no simple reflex. It was a moment of extreme spiritual peril. An open, unguarded mouth was seen as a wide-open gateway, a brightly lit entrance to your very soul. Demons and malicious spirits, always on the lookout for a vacant body to inhabit, could see that yawn as a personal invitation to fly right in and set up shop. This is believed to be one of the origins of the tradition of covering your mouth when you yawn. It wasn't about politeness, it was a desperate, defensive maneuver to slam the door shut. Making the sign of the cross afterward was like hiring a spiritual bouncer to make sure no uninvited entity had slipped past your defenses. Suddenly, feeling a bit sleepy in church became a whole lot more stressful. 13. If you were to look at a medieval map of the world, you'd find that the unexplored edges were not just blank spaces. They were a veritable who's who of monstrous humanoids, a freak show born from garbled travelers' tales and a wild imagination. Far-off lands like Africa and Asia were supposedly populated by races like the Blemyai, terrifying headless men who had their faces conveniently located in their chests. Or the Cyopods, who had a single, gigantic foot they used as a personal parasol to block the sun. Then there were the Cynocephali, a race of dog-headed men, and people with ears so enormous they could use them as blankets. These weren't just doodles, for many they were factual representations of what lay beyond the known world, turning geography into a terrifying catalog of nature's weirdest mistakes. 14. In the medieval world, few substances were believed to hold as much raw, chaotic power as menstrual blood. This natural bodily fluid was seen as a supernatural Swiss Army knife, a powerhouse of magical potential that was both revered and deeply feared. It was a key ingredient in potent love potions, believed to be able to ensnare the heart of any man. A few drops sprinkled on a field could supposedly ward off pests and ensure a bountiful harvest. But its power was wildly unpredictable. It was also said to have the ability to rust iron on contact, dull the sharpest blades, curdle fresh milk, cause dogs to go insane, and even stop hailstorms in their tracks. It was the ultimate double-edged sword of folk magic, an ingredient you handled with extreme caution unless you wanted your entire life to go sideways. 15. So, you're hopelessly in love with someone who doesn't even know you're alive. In the Middle Ages, the go-to solution wasn't writing poetry or engaging in conversation. It was to brew a love potion, a magical roofie that took all the guesswork out of romance. These concoctions were filled with a horrifying list of ingredients, including Spanish fly, a powder made from blister beetles that's actually a dangerous poison, the hearts of doves, powdered earthworms, and, of course, the ever-popular menstrual blood. The concept of consent was, to put it mildly, not a major consideration. The goal was magical coercion, not mutual affection. It's frankly a miracle that anyone formed a genuine relationship, what with the constant risk of being secretly fed a disgusting, potentially lethal cocktail designed to magically hijack your free will. 16. The obsession with holy relics in the Middle Ages went far beyond simple reverence. It was an intense, competitive hoarding of saintly body parts and possessions. Churches and cathedrals across Europe vied to have the most impressive collection to attract pilgrims and their money. While some relics were plausible, like a splinter of the true cross or the bone of a martyr, the market quickly escalated into the bizarre. You had vials claiming to contain the Virgin Mary's breast milk, the breath of Saint Joseph captured in a bottle, and most famously, the holy foreskin of Jesus, a relic so prestigious that at least a dozen different churches all claim to possess the one true article. The more gruesome or outlandish the relic, the more miraculous power it was said to hold, creating a wild, unregulated trade in holy artifacts. 17. Picture this. You're a medieval noble, constantly worried that your jealous cousin might slip a little something extra into your goblet of wine. Your best line of defense wasn't a loyal food taster, but a fashionable piece of jewelry called a toadstone. This mystical gem, supposedly harvested from the head of a toad, was the era's most advanced poison detection system. In reality, they were just fossilized fish teeth, but the belief was that when worn as a ring or amulet, the stone would heat up, sweat, or even change color in the presence of poison, giving you a crucial heads-up before you took a fatal sip. It was a stylish accessory with a built-in alarm system, making it far more practical than a human servant who could only warn you once before dropping dead himself. Who needs modern chemistry when you've got amphibian-based security bling? 18. If you were unfortunate enough to contract scrofula, a grim form of tuberculosis that caused hideous, swelling sores on your neck, your best hope for a cure wasn't a doctor. In England and France, the most sought-after treatment was a personal audience with the king. It was widely believed that the monarch, by virtue of their divine right to rule, possessed a miraculous healing touch, specifically for this one disease, which became known as the king's evil. Imagine endless lines of suffering people, waiting for hours just for the king to briefly lay his royal hands on their necks. It was a brilliant piece of public relations for the monarchy, reinforcing their God-given authority, even if the actual medical benefits were, to put it mildly, non-existent. It was a powerful political statement disguised as a faith-healing ceremony. 19. We've all heard of putting a person on trial, but in the Middle Ages they took it a step further and put animals in the dock. This wasn't a joke. It was a serious, formal legal process. A pig that mauled a child, a bull that gored a farmer, or even a swarm of locusts that devoured a field could be arrested, formally charged, and brought before a court. These animal defendants were often assigned their own lawyers, who would argue passionately on their behalf. There are actual historical records of these bizarre trials, where evidence was presented and witnesses were called to testify against a rooster or a group of rats. If found guilty, the animal could be sentenced to public execution, just like a human criminal. It's a surreal chapter in legal history where the justice system had to contend with homicidal livestock. 20. For medieval women, a wide range of ailments, from anxiety and shortness of breath to simple faintness, were often attributed to a single bizarre diagnosis: a wandering womb. Drawing on ancient Greek medical theories, doctors believed that the uterus, or hystera, was not a fixed organ. Instead, they thought it could become unmoored and drift around the inside of a woman's body like a lost balloon. If it floated up to the chest, it could cause breathing difficulties. If it pressed against the brain, it might cause hysteria. The prescribed treatments were just as strange. Doctors would try to lure the errant organ back to its proper place, with pleasant smells applied down below, while simultaneously using foul-smelling substances held under the nose to scare it away from the upper body. It was, quite literally, a form of internal organ herding via aromatherapy. 21. The mandrake root was one of the most prized ingredients in medieval magic, partly because its forked shape often resembled a tiny human being. But harvesting it came with a deadly risk. According to legend, when the mandrake was pulled from the ground, it would let out a scream so piercing and powerful that it would instantly kill anyone who heard it. So how did you get one? With a clever and deeply unethical trick involving a dog. The harvester would tie one end of a rope to the mandrake and the other to a dog they weren't particularly attached to. After plugging their own ears with wax, they'd toss a piece of meat just out of the dog's reach. As the poor animal lunged for the food, it would uproot the mandrake, hear the fatal shriek, and drop dead, leaving the harvester with a safe, silent, and very valuable magical root. 22. We might worry about Friday the 13th, but for people in the Middle Ages, the entire calendar was a minefield of bad luck. They lived in fear of dies mali, or evil days. These were specific unlucky dates scattered throughout the year, usually 2 per month, on which it was considered catastrophic to do almost anything important. Getting married, starting a new business, planting your crops, or even just taking medicine on one of these cursed days was seen as an open invitation for disaster. These dates were passed down through generations in almanacs and folklore, creating a complex schedule of cosmic doom that had to be carefully navigated. Planning any significant life event must have been a logistical nightmare, as you constantly had to check your calendar to make sure you weren't accidentally scheduling your wedding on a day the universe had decided to hate. 23. When the Black Death swept through Europe, wiping out a huge portion of the population, people were desperate for an explanation. Since they had no concept of germs, they settled on a culprit they could understand: miasma, or bad air. This wasn't just unpleasant smog. It was believed to be a toxic, pestilential fog that rose from swamps, decaying organic matter, and even the ground itself. It was, in essence, the deadly flatulence of the earth. The proposed solutions were just as misguided. People would carry around bouquets of flowers called nosegays to sniff constantly, hoping the good smell would overpower the bad. They burned fragrant herbs in their homes and even rang church bells loudly, believing the vibrations could shatter the poisonous air. It was the equivalent of trying to fight a wildfire with a can of air freshener. 24. If you were born with red hair in the Middle Ages, you were starting life at a serious disadvantage. For a variety of bizarre reasons, that particular hair color was deeply associated with all things negative and untrustworthy. It was the color most often used to depict the traitor Judas Iscariot in religious art, forever linking it with betrayal. Red-headed women were seen as being more prone to witchcraft and possessing fiery, uncontrollable tempers. In some folklore, red hair was even considered a sign of vampirism, or that the person was secretly in league with fairies. It was a world where a simple genetic trait could mark you for life with suspicion and prejudice, a sort of divinely ordained bad hair day with potentially lethal consequences. Life for the medieval ginger was anything but easy. 25. Forget the tortured, handsome werewolves you see in movies today. In the Middle Ages, the belief in lycanthropy was a terrifying and deadly serious reality. These weren't misunderstood anti-heroes. They were seen as demon-possessed monsters, cursed individuals who had made a pact with the devil to transform into ravenous beasts that terrorized villages and slaughtered livestock. Being accused of being a werewolf, perhaps because you were a bit hairy, antisocial, or just unpopular with the wrong person, was practically a death sentence. Trials were a sham, often involving brutal torture to force a confession. As the full moon rose, a palpable fear gripped communities. It was a world where the shadows truly had claws and teeth, and the line between man and monster was terrifyingly thin. 26. Before you made any major life decision, whether it was asking for a raise, proposing marriage, or launching a military campaign, you absolutely had to consult an astrologer. The planets and stars weren't just pretty lights in the sky. They were seen as cosmic micromanagers, divine puppet masters pulling the strings of fate. Your entire life, from your personality and health to the success of your crops, was believed to be dictated by the alignment of celestial bodies at the time of your birth. Was Mercury in retrograde? You might as well cancel all your plans and hide under a blanket, because anything you started was doomed to fail spectacularly. Free will took a back seat to a pre-written cosmic script, making astrology an essential and deadly serious tool for navigating daily life. 27. Suffering from a fever, a pounding headache, or even just a bout of melancholy? The go-to prescription from nearly every medieval physician, barber surgeon, or village healer was the same: bloodletting. The logical cure for almost any ailment, from the common cold to the bubonic plague, was apparently to drain the patient of their vital fluids. This was all based on the ancient theory of balancing the four humors. In practice, it usually just left the sick person weaker, anemic, and even more vulnerable to the disease they were trying to fight. Patients were subjected to leeches or direct cuts from a lancet in a desperate attempt to restore balance. But one has to wonder how many people were cured right into an early grave by this terrifyingly misguided medical practice. 28. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, paralyzed and filled with a sense of overwhelming dread, with a heavy weight on your chest. Today, we'd call that sleep paralysis. In the Middle Ages, the diagnosis was far more sinister: a nocturnal visit from a demon. If you were a woman, it was an incubus, a male demon that came to assault you in your sleep. If you were a man, it was a succubus, a female demon sent to steal your life force. These weren't romantic fantasies. They were terrifying, demonic violations believed to corrupt your soul or even result in the birth of monstrous, half-human children. What modern science explains as a neurological glitch between sleep and wakefulness was interpreted as a demonic booty call with no option to say no. 29. In our time, a comet blazing across the night sky is a breathtaking astronomical event. For the medieval mind, it was anything but. A comet wasn't a ball of ice and rock. It was a terrifying omen, a fiery finger of God pointing down from the heavens to signal impending doom. The appearance of a comet was seen as a divine warning of coming plagues, the death of kings, widespread famine, or a disastrous war. Every unexpected celestial event, from a solar eclipse to a meteor shower, was interpreted as a sign that the cosmic balance had been upset, sending people into a panic of prayer and finger-pointing. It was a time when looking up at the night sky could be a source of profound, existential terror, as the universe itself seemed to be a total drama queen. 30. The medieval world had a wonderfully simple, if completely wrong, approach to pharmacology known as the doctrine of signatures. The belief was that God, in his infinite wisdom, had designed nature like a giant visual pharmacy. Plants and minerals that looked like a particular human body part were believed to be the divine cure for ailments affecting that part. For example, walnuts, which resemble tiny brains, were obviously the cure for headaches and mental issues. Lungwort, an herb with spotted leaves that looked like diseased lungs, was used to treat respiratory problems. It was a system of medicine based on visual puns, where finding a cure was like playing a high-stakes game of Pictionary with the Almighty. This oddly shaped root looks like a kidney stone. Jackpot. 31. Got a toothache so bad it feels like someone is drilling into your jaw? The medieval explanation wasn't poor hygiene or too much honey in your mead. The culprit was the toothworm, a tiny malicious creature believed to burrow into your teeth and gnaw on the nerves from the inside. This belief was so widespread that cures were designed to expel the worm. A common treatment involved fumigating the patient's mouth with the smoke from burning henbane seeds, a hallucinogenic plant. The patient would then trip out and see visions of the worm crawling out of their mouth, thus proving the treatment worked. If that failed, the local blacksmith was always on hand to solve the problem permanently, with a pair of rusty pliers and a strong arm, no anesthetic required. 32. While educated scholars since the time of the ancient Greeks knew the Earth was a sphere, for the average person in the Middle Ages, the world was a flat disk, like a giant cosmic plate. And what happened if you sailed too far? You'd fall right off the edge. This common belief, fueled by folklore and a lack of widespread scientific knowledge, made long-distance sea travel an existentially terrifying prospect. The edges of the map weren't just unknown. They were the gateway to a terrifying abyss filled with sea monsters, dragons, or perhaps just an endless, horrifying fall into nothingness. It added a whole new layer of danger to exploration. Forget worrying about storms and pirates. The biggest fear was accidentally sailing off the face of the planet. That was a tour through the absolute peak of medieval paranoia. We searched far and wide for these 32 absurdities, but we know for a fact that history's rabbit hole of weirdness goes deeper. So, prove it. What is the one local or regional medieval belief so insane, so utterly bizarre, that we were fools to miss it? Dig up your country's weirdest superstition and put it in the comments. If this journey into madness earned your approval, destroy the like button and subscribe for more.